The last panel of the first 2020-30 is going to focus on products, and we're going to look at refocusing what it means to create a fashion product and what is defined as a fashion product at all today. What are the user demands and the system transformers driving the change? And I have three fabulous panelists here to debate this topic. I'd like to introduce them to you now. I am joined this afternoon by Anne Prahl, who is an independent design professional with extensive experience in the sports and fashion industry. She specializes in design-driven sustainable innovation to improve resource efficiency and really enable a more considered and earth-friendly consumption. So she runs different projects that involve design research and writing, trend forecasting and analysis, as well as creative direction and product design. She also offers trainings and workshops, so is an educator in this field as well, and we hope to be able to tap her brains this afternoon for some of those future trends taking shape today. I'm also joined by Femke Zijlstra, who is a motivated, sustainable business leader in the international textile industry. She is an independent consultant who initiates, advises, and works towards circular systems with sustainable products, and was formerly at Dyco, which is one of those solutions just that put me in awe, how you can turn around the game and use CO2 as an innovative technology to not pollute the environment, but be extractive and a sustainable solution in the dyeing industry. So, of course, one of those big things that we're looking at that can be a game changer. So looking forward to learning more about Dyco. And last but not least, we're joined by Leslie Holden, who really has a wealth of experience, over 20 years of experience in the fashion industries with companies such as Dunhill, Stefanel, Burberry, and the list of grand names continues, but also extensive knowledge, not just in this luxury brand market, but also in education. He is formerly the head of fashion at the Amsterdam Fashion Institute, AMFI, and was there on the board also for over 14 years, as well as responsible for developing really groundbreaking curricula, including Hypercraft, a minor where students immerse themselves in the world of 3D and virtual design. So it's fantastic to have Leslie here as an expert on the digital as well. Great to have all three of you here. Welcome to 2020-30.
Hello.
Thank you.
I also want to Yes, you're most welcome. And just remind our listeners, our audience, that we'd be very happy to include them into the debate because we're taking questions and comments, and you can drop those into the chat on the swap card tool. And you can also join in the debate publicly by using our hashtag 2020-30. So we want to take apart what are those system transformers, those game changers. And I would love to jump in with a topic that you, Anna, have been working on in the past and are engaged in, which is the topic of material innovation. And there's so many exciting new developments happening for alternative materials that can replace animal products, but generally also bring a new change towards sustainability. And I'd love for you to share a little bit where the most exciting things, perhaps trends in that direction, are happening currently from your view.
Yeah, okay. I think there's too many different materials, happening at the moment. I mean, it's very exciting. Everyone's on a journey to try and replace fossil fuel using waste materials. So there's a lot going on, but in the context of digital innovation, I'm really excited about the materials that are actually created at the same time as garments. So where we're looking at 3D printing, spraying, 3D knitting, and so far it's all been very artistic. But I think we're seeing so much innovation coming through how you can grow materials from algae, let's say, and how it's actually formed around the body into particular shapes. So to me, that's the most exciting field, the whole sort of the biotech field combined with the digital manufacturing. So really growing materials in shapes. So we're really reducing waste. We're using waste materials and new alternatives to polyester, which is still, obviously one of the biggest fabrics that we're all kind of struggling with in this industry.
Absolutely. I think that's a key point that you raised, especially as waste material is such a huge remaining issue in the industry. I'm guessing, or it's just one of these assumptions, that the pandemic is also another game changer when it comes to material innovation, and perhaps looking at how functionality is going to be an increasing topic in the next years as we're dealing with the pandemic. Would you agree with that, Anna?
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, I'm not a fashionista as such. My field is much more in sportswear. So obviously, sportswear has seen, during the pandemic, a huge increase. Most of the brands are actually doing really well compared to the fashion industry. The same as so many startups that are popping up to offer new sort of more considered materials, within the sportswear realm. So there is so much going on in that field, and it's not stopping anyone in sportswear. The whole recycled polyester is obviously totally mainstream now. So I wouldn't really call it an innovation. It's just something people are doing to be a little bit better. But really, the innovation is around the kind of functional, comfortable, fabrics. Everyone's wearing sportswear now, whether they're, meeting friends in the park or going for a coffee. So it's really about feeling comfortable. No one's wearing denim or jeans anymore. I was looking at my wardrobe earlier and looking longingly at all these clothes I haven't worn for nearly 12 months. But I love my jog bottoms, and I'm never going to take them off again. So.
Yes, there's been a lot of exciting conversations about homeware, and they've just gotten a new window to the world now, really, these days. I think you again touched on some important points, and one of them was also scalability of some of these innovative solutions that we're seeing coming up, and how we can bring them from a niche product to something that's really a game changer in the industry. And I want to bring you in on this point, Femke. I know you're involved in a number of other projects, but I would like to invite you to speak a little bit about Dyco to start with. And
my pleasure.
Great. Like, for those of those who are not familiar with the technology, maybe you can give us a little bit of a nutshell summary of how Dyco works as a CO2 extracting dye.
I think Dyco is a great example, because it's actually a technology that lets itself explain quite easily. But it's good to remember, in perspective of time, how many years ago they started to scale an initiative of using CO2 as a medium for dyeing. It was back in the late 90s that they started trialing on lab scale if they could actually use CO2 to dissolve dyes and actually transfer it as a carrier to your polyester. And we're now in we know the summit, we're in 2030 perspective, and it's still a technology with lots of opportunities to scale further. So it's just to give you time how long it takes to build a technology from a lab environment and actually bring it to full commercial scale and to a full audience. But to answer your question, you can use CO2. Obviously, there's a lot of CO2 being created by our industry, but it's not only bad, because CO2 has unique characteristics. And actually, if you use the CO2 in combination of temperature and pressure, it gets into this supercritical stage. And the characteristics of a supercritical stage is that it can dissolve dyes naturally, so the pure dispersed dyes without the processing chemicals that you need in an aqua system to dissolve the dye stuff. It can be done in its pure form in a CO2 environment, in a pressure of 250 degrees and a temperature of 120 degrees, of 250 bar, I should say. And what happens, the CO2 is able to dissolve the dye stuff, and at the same time, your polyester really opens up to receive the dye stuff. And the CO2 is fully absorbed with the dye stuff, with the dissolved dye stuff, and actually brings it as a carrier to your core of your polyester. And at the moment you keep on flowing your CO2, you use it as a medium to completely color your polyester textile. With dropping the temperature, dropping the pressure back to normal circumstances, this is where you lock your dye stuff in your fiber. Your CO2 is cleaned again within the process. Interesting is if you drop the pressure, the CO2 becomes like a gas, and in a gas you cannot hold any of your waste that is in your polyester material. Think of a little bit of moist, think a little bit of oil that you use for creating your yarn, maybe a little bit of dye stuff that is not gone to your fabric. This is basically how you can catch your waste. Your CO2 is completely cleaned again and can be used in your next circle. So this is a circular process, completely clean without processing chemicals. Optimize the recipe that all your dye stuff is actually going to the material and not leaving any waste behind. So very simple. Of course, it's not simple because it takes a little bit of engineering to manage your temperature and high pressure, but it works. It's there. It's at scale.
And it's, simple and yet revolutionary at the same time. As I said, I get super excited talking about CO2 extracting innovations and technologies. And you mentioned the sort of long haul, though, that this takes to really take effect. And at the same time, this feeling of urgency and that we're running out of time. Do you have a perspective, both with DYCO, but perhaps also with other technologies? We had a panel yesterday, for instance, on regulation and other political measures that can be taken, how we can speed up the scaling of such technologies that really do have an ecological impact in the industry.
Well, I think the terms of a penalty and a stick or a carrot can really help if you promote sustainable technologies to grow, and you really force the real price to be paid for maybe more polluters that are not being paid today. It would actually bring a more true price to the product we're creating, and that really helps to boost alternative technologies, because it does at a certain point the supply chain will have to purchase new machines in order to be able to produce. So in order for the supply chain to invest in new technology, they like the support from brands to have a certain amount of volume, so they have stability to install machines, to make it work in their own facilities, train people, make sure the product is optimized. There's always a big discussion on quality. Quality takes optimization. So of course the penalty and the stick works, but the true work is happening in a very fine-tuned collaboration between green tech, brands, supply chain, and that golden triangle is essential that we need to work. And you can't work in isolation. The big collaboration work. It's being open about the problems you're facing. Respect that sometimes you need to start small before you can actually scale. So this is an ongoing, interesting world whereby you have to educate, whereby you have to speak to each other, whereby you have to find people that are willing to invest and make things work. Because in the end, it's an industry that needs to work. And if we talk about production, we talk about scale. And obviously, there's still so much polyester. Let's talk recycled polyester, because we have to get rid of the fossil fuel. I'm completely agreeing there. But it takes time to make things work. And if you're in production, you want things to go flawless. And that just takes a little bit of time.
I mean, one of the big, of course, digital technologies are seen as like the major driving force, one of those systemic game changers. But of course, as you just mentioned, things are complex and systemic change. And the virtual fashion revolution is only going to happen if the renewable energy revolution happens. Leslie, I would like to bring you in on this point, because I know, of course, these are some of the things that you work on and think about. We've heard such exciting talks today about virtual fashion shows, 3D modeling, working together with physical modeling. So really a lot more openness, I think, for embracing the possibilities of the digital without seeing them as a threat, but rather as enhancing and interacting complementary methodologies and tools. Is that also an approach that you're taking? And one term I wanted to bring out, like in other industries, this idea of the digital twin has been sort of one of these key terms, buzzwords that have been flying around. And a lot of the topics that were mentioned, especially in the keynote and in the last demo, reminded me of this idea of the digital twin. Is that an increasingly prevalent concept in the fashion industry as well?
Yeah, good questions. to give you a little bit of idea where I am at the moment in my career, because you gave all this experience that I've done and all these designers I've worked for and Amphi, etc., etc. Then at the present moment, I'm building a new kind of education. It's the Digital Fashion Group. And we are building a new model of online digital education. And we're working on our first course at the moment. It's all done and it's in post-production. And basically what we've done is we've interviewed lots of key stakeholders in the digital environment, in the digital business. I personally think that everything starts with education. Everything begins with a new mindset and a new way of thinking about what fashion could possibly be, about reimagining where we're going and new ways to get there. I think all these new technologies are, like Matthew said, giving us new opportunities and new possibilities to see fashion in completely different ways than we've seen it before. And that's wonderful. That's wonderful for creatives. And it's really important, I think, that the creative is at the center of this whole conversation, because the creative has been very much left out of the data dialogue in many ways. I think things like virtual twins are, of course, hugely important as we go forward. The way that people see themselves in the physical and see themselves in the digital, and how they want to represent themselves in different ways, vastly important. I think that the key thing going forward is that we have so many opportunities to really rewrite how we want the industry to be. And I think that's the most important thing about the opportunities that we have with digital technology. Did that answer your question at all, or did I just waffle on about something completely?
No, I was going to invite you to speak a bit more about what you're doing at the Digital Fashion Group. So you preempted that and combined it with an answer to my question. We had so I've been doing one of these panels for 2020-30 throughout the 3 public event days. And on the first day, we mentioned an article in the BBC that spoke about this idea that the frivolous is going to move to the digital, the experimental is going to move to the digital, and the playful is going to move to the digital as the physical world becomes more and more resource constrained and we're facing more and more environmental issues. Is that something you agree with? And I'm wondering how that also features perhaps in the mindset of some of those, I'm guessing, young Generation Z people you've been teaching.
I think that's possible, of course, that we can live in another kind of creative universe where we can express ourselves in other ways which are less harmful on the environment. That is all possible. However, I see it from a different perspective. I see the main drivers for this, for the reason that we're doing it and for the reason it's happening, are things like the environment, are things like sustainability, are things like circular economy, are things like COVID amplifying the way that technology is being used, or things like social media, etc., etc. These things are giving us opportunities to question more and find other ways of approaching old problems with new solutions. I think that what technology can do for us, rather than just creating a frivolous environment is actually very real and very serious, in that it can help support the movements towards a more sustainable industry that we really have to go towards. And it can also encourage and develop better practice, better creative practices. But we have to be on top of this. Something like AI, for example, I went to meet with Stitch Fix last year in San Francisco, and one of my friends was a director there and heard all about how they were working and how they were designing with AI, etc., etc. And I was so amazed at the possibilities that this was offering. But it made me think, my God, it's the end of fashion as we know it. It's certainly the end of fashion education as we know it. Because in my knowledge, I don't know any fashion school that is teaching fashion designers how to work with big data. So I think rather than being frivolous, it's actually extremely serious and can really help towards making our industry a better, cleaner industry.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point that you just raised there, Leslie, and I want to tie it in with a question that came in. I'm sorry if I'm looking down, I'm just looking at my phone to see what questions are coming in via the chat, not because I'm not paying attention to what you're saying. The point that you just made, how can innovation be a democratizing factor in the fashion industry and not something that concentrates power even further in regard especially to data-driven services and AI? And that's a question that came in via the chat. Are we going to see more of a concentration toward big players like even Google, Facebook, and the likes, as we're seeing a further datafication? Or how can we make sure young designers, young startups, upcoming folks still have a possibility to engage in this game and collaborate? Maybe also Anna and Femke want to come in on this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Sorry, maybe you go.
Anna, if you want to go first, and then we'll do a quick round on this one.
Okay. I forgot what I'm going to say now. Oh, yeah, with the startups versus the big companies. I think, what we're seeing a lot is that the startups are coming up with the innovation because they are, more agile, or they have the idea. They actually, their whole being is, around this particular innovation. So they can really focus on it. And we're seeing the big brands kind of almost, copying and looking out for what the startups are doing. So I think it's that kind of relationship with the startups coming up with these ideas, and then the big brands, sort of jumping on board, and they kind of need each other to make it work. Because the startups by themselves can't reach maybe as many consumers, or they need, the money. We're seeing a lot of the big brands buying up small startups or, technologies that have been innovated. So I think it's really a two-way process. One can't live without the other. So I don't think it's just the big guys or just the small guys.
Mm. Maybe also over to Femke. Somebody else asked a quite similar question. How can we make sure sustainable design, the tools, the technologies are available to young upcoming designers and not monopolized by those who have already the money and the power?
Well, I like to think positive. There's a few, indeed, risks of scale and dependencies on where the ownership of artificial intelligence and algorithms actually go to. Something positive can turn into something negative. But if I look at, I saw the movie Social Impact, or Social Dilemmas, I think it's called, and that really shows a little bit on what algorithms in that environment can do, so that this triggers a little bit of where our dependency goes. But okay, back to positive. Design is art. I don't think an art is the story of really the power of really making people become beautiful through clothing. And that is a skill. The skill to tell stories is something unique a designer can do. And if all this can bring us to go back to really strong designers that can do the storytelling and go back to that profession, I think that makes the profession of designing and a lot more interesting than just putting an embroidery at a different position or where your pocket is positioned, which some of the designers are doing them today and just creating colorways. So if that could really elevate the profession of designing again, I think that would be beautiful. I think when it comes to production and garments, it does start with design. So I hope it gives actually a beautiful boost to the art and the true profession of being a designer. And I would see that. I would love that to be there.
I think one of the tensions for design is that it can be placed purely in the category of art, and that designers are creative and should be placed in this little box to be creative, and are not interested in anything else apart from being artists. I do not see that as a designer going forward in the future. I see a designer has to have more technology skills. A designer has to understand how to use data as a tool to support their ideas, because so much of the designers' ideas come from intuition and come from experience and come from kind of soaking up what's happening in the spirit of the age and bringing it onto some kind of visual format. But often a designer is questioned by the merchandiser or the buyer or the business person to say, well, how do we want exactly the same as we had last season because that's sold. Just put a different embroidery on it, or just change the pocket because that's what's sold. With something like AI as a tool that can be used better by the designer can really then support their ideas and say, yeah, these are the facts, and I've worked from this. It's not just up here and here. It's from data as well. I think it's really important going forward that we both look at technology like AI and really work on the ethics around it to make sure that it's developing properly for what we really want it for, and not just for fast fashion, not just for more production, but really to develop better ways of working and more creativity. And that the creative is actually placed in a position where they have more real control over the creative process, rather than just being placed somewhere and made to feel that they're only an artist. Not that only an artist is a bad thing, but not having an idea about how business works.
I think it's a very nice summary of the sort of desirable way that humanity should be advancing in collaboration with technology on a whole, right? How can we, as I was saying, not see AI necessarily as a threat or something replacing the humanistic side of our creation, but an enhancing tool. I felt like there was a slight sense of disagreement or controversy on the panel regarding that. If anybody wants to jump in and comment, please do feel free. And you're really good at preempting questions today, Leslie, because that was a question that came in, like what other skills will designers in the future need to bring to the table? And the data aspect, I think you named, is a key aspect of that. Again, if the others want to add to that.
Yeah, can I just say about these? I think it's really important that a designer understands what different technology is out there, and not necessarily how to use every technology, because they can do that. They can learn that as well by themselves, or they can do courses or whatever. That's the easiest part. The most difficult part is actually understanding the possibilities and seeing examples of what technology is there. And unfortunately, orthodox fashion education today doesn't give students the opportunity to see these technologies working? Sorry, I jumped back in there.
Can I jump in?
Please jump in, Anne.
I'm a great fan of digital technologies to enable sustainability, but I'm also really worried how everyone seems to be jumping on digital technologies, AI, all this stuff, just because it's there and because we can use it. I think the big question still is, why are we designing these clothes? Who are we designing them for? And, why do we need them all? So I'm just really worried that we're getting quite far apart from the product as creators, because we're just seeing it on screens and it's all very virtual. And I just like thinking back to when I learned to design, and I used to, I tell this at every panel, so people are probably bored of me saying it, but I used to draw by hand. I had to color in my designs. It took weeks to color in a collection. So I had a really deep relationship, probably sniffing pens, that kind of thing. But, I had a relationship as a designer, between the design and, because I saw it for weeks on end and I could think about it and I really cared about the product. Whereas now, digital technologies, we can create products in seconds or minutes. And what do they mean anymore? Why are we churning out all these products? So I'm just a bit cautious about, I love all the stuff and the virtual fashion and everything, but we just need to think, why are we creating it and what for? Especially at the moment.
Yeah. We don't need more clothes. We don't need more things to wear.
There's a great tie-in, I believe, which also came out in the panel yesterday, where the idea that we have a new love for the things that we own, a new understanding of ownership, and also this rekindling of the creative side. Somebody mentioned all those kids on TikTok sharing crafty tips and tools of how to entertain themselves outside of looking at their screens during the pandemic, and that there's a lot of charm in that, perhaps, to think together these technological advancements and exactly that kind of sort of back to the roots feeling of designing and making and creating. Femke, do you want to add your thoughts to that?
It just makes me think, right? If I see my own children at home, like the younger generation, how extremely they are influenced by their real world, but is, in my view, a virtual world. But they are so inspired by that. And if products, if you think about the new business model that's been discussed throughout this week as well about rental, and rather than product ownership, talk about accessibility to product. That makes a garment that is real on a virtual environment becomes accessible through a different distribution method, affordable for their age to wear as well. I think that's very interesting, because and if you use it for a while and return it back for another person to use, you automatically enter up in a discussion what type of quality expectations you have for a product. For me, that brings back to how many washes, how can we clean it, what's the yarn count, what's the weight, what's the longevity aspects, and that brings back the good old quality discussion again of the heritage of your product and how to use it. And in my world, you can see it. You can see that becoming a reality. So I like that. I like the world. I like to see that happen.
Thanks for bringing that up, Femke, because that's definitely been a recurring theme of the last days, as we had Rune from Prahl in the panel on the first day, who offers one of these services. And it was also a topic that we debated yesterday. And I was actually going to bring that into our panel. The question is, if we are consuming less, if fashion collections have a new lease of life because they're going to be lent on, and that might lead to revenue streams going down in regard to actual physical sales. What are alternative revenue streams that we can think of in terms of services or other complementary products or services to go with that, which could have been a whole nother debate to get into. Leslie, of course, mentioned some data-driven services could be part of that discussion, the sharing of other software tools or sort of B2B services within that could have been another aspect. We're very quickly running out of time, but maybe if there's one thought that each of you want to add to the topic of how can potentially services be also a new innovative product line that we're looking at in the fashion industry, and use this as a closing statement for the panel, then maybe we can do that now. I'm just going to check if any other questions came in, but no, I think that's it. So yeah, maybe beginning with you, Leslie.
Yeah, I think that it's not going to be one thing or another. It can be many things. It's very postmodern. I think that we can also get a whole fashion environment which is totally virtual and totally digital, and like the fabricant would push for. And I think from there's many opportunities, economic opportunities, business opportunities, which come with a completely virtual world. So I think that we should think about less production. We should think about more on-demand production, where digital can certainly help with that. And we should think about other ways, other services, other ways that fashion, the feeling for fashion, can be explored without actually having to produce garments.
Thank you. Femke, would you like to go next?
Yeah, no, I a little bit agree with Leslie. I think there's always a system that has multiple drivers. So I think when it comes to fashion and to products, there's product you own, there's product you rent, and there's products you share. For me, it goes back to having products that are of good quality, that allow you to own, to rent, and to share. I just think back of this time we're in, this year we're in now, that people are cleaning up their wardrobes and really enjoy again for having get rid of the stuff they don't need. And I hope that is really in our everybody human is realizing that the products we really decide to own are the products that we really care about, and the products that we are not caring so much about are open for rental, and that this type of secondhand, and this is really becoming even a bigger platform than it already is today. But for me, it has to go back to product with quality that is designed to care and designed to make generation after generation beautiful. And that is what textiles is. We have it every day. We wear it every day. So it should be used to wear and not to throw away. So I think that's the root of where we go back to.
Thank you, Femke. And Anna, can I invite you for a closing statement on the topic, please?
Yeah, okay. So for me, the biggest opportunity around services is really creating communities that go beyond the product. It's so brands can push their products, but really create a community for people to have a network of friendships, like-minded people, very much, again, coming from sportswear. We can have yoga clubs, running clubs, and that can extend to fashion. But it's, especially in this time where everyone's in their own bubble, it's so important to have this feeling of community, and people can come together to either enjoy activities or learn. So that's where education can come in, where they can get tips about repair, how to care for their garments, where to return them to. So it's giving much more than just the product, providing a backdrop to the product, and creating a community to make people happier, and especially at the moment and going forward.
I could not agree with you more. What excellent pieces of free advice, people who are listening to last statement to Scott. A big thank you to all the three of you for being part of 2020-30, and of course also to everybody who listened and contributed questions and comments.